Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Empower. Hope you guys are having a wonderful time so far already. Today, or I guess right now, you are joining the Becoming a Jinja Ninja session. And so we're going to try and get you to a point where you can take your pipelines to the next level. My name is Ryan Pflederer. I am a solution architect here at Quickbase. I've been at Quickbase for about 2 years now. Prior to that, though, I was a customer across a few different organizations for about 7 years. First introduced Quickbase through the line of business as an end user, then took on some admin responsibilities, continued growing in that regard, went through a few different organizations across a few different industries, and here I am now. So like many of you, I've been in many different roles in regards to using Quickbase, building Quickbase, and all of that. So let's jump right in. We do have a demo app on the Exchange. So if you haven't already gotten that, I would suggest going to the Exchange and getting that, because we will be walking through and getting hands-on with Jinja today. So if you're in a builder account or corporate account, you can see that there's a few different ways to access the Exchange from that My Apps page. Once you get into the Exchange, you can go ahead and search Jinja Ninja, Becoming a Jinja Ninja. You will see that there, and I believe we will be throwing the link to that in the chat below. So go ahead and follow that link, get that downloaded. Again, we will be using that. And once you get that downloaded, go ahead and create a user token for it. We are going to be using pipelines, obviously, so you're going to want to get that authenticated. Okay, so a few things to start off with here. Basic agenda is we're going to cover foundational concepts, what are statements, what are filters, the whole 9 yards there. So some of the key takeaways are going to be, what is Jinja? How do I use it? That type of thing. How does Jinja differ from formulas that we all know and love already? And also understand what is possible with Jinja. Like, why would I choose to use Jinja over, some of the different options that are available within Quickbase. So start off with foundational concepts. Right off the bat, I do want to put it out there that this is an advanced session where we will be covering some programming concepts. And so if you aren't familiar with some basic code or coding programming concepts, that's okay. More than welcome to stay. Just want to make sure I throw that out there. And kind of going back a little bit about myself, I have no formal education experience with programming. It's all just been through Quickbase, using Quickbase over, like I said, the last 9 years, getting into the community, trying to find different solutions for different use cases, where I started picking up some of the, I guess, programming skills. So JavaScript, CSS, HTML, now Jinja. And through that, it actually enabled me to kind of get into some other areas within the realm of program development as well. But now that we kind of got that disclaimer out there, Jinja, what is Jinja? Jinja is a template language that is commonly used with Python. Pipelines in the back end is built with Python, and therefore we're using Jinja within pipelines. And within pipelines, the reason why we are using Jinja, or what we're using Jinja for, is to work with the responses that come in via pipelines. So again, kind of a little more detail on the back end of pipelines is we have all of these native channels. And these native channels are using APIs behind the scenes. And when they're making, API calls out to some of these third-party solutions, endpoints, they're getting a response oftentimes in a JSON response. JSON is a standard file format that is commonly used with APIs across the board. So we've got our new RESTful APIs that are in the JSON file format, which were released last year. Again, very common across the industry for APIs to be in that JSON file format.
Hey, Ryan, sorry to interrupt, but if you just press F5 and refresh, I think your video is frozen.
Oh, no. Uh-oh. F5 did not do what I expected. Okay, am I back? Yay, nay? Okay, looks like I'm back. So sounds like the audio didn't cut out, so everybody was still tracking with the audio. Excellent. Now, where was I? JSON. JSON is, again, standard file format, which is utilized by APIs. And so kind of getting into I understand that JSON is being used within pipelines, and we're using Jinja, but we can use Jinja to navigate those JSON responses, be it within a some of the native channels, or even within like the generic channels that are allowing you to make calls to third-party services we don't have a native channel to connect to. So within the foundational concepts, we've got JSON. And so kind of going to walk through JSON, what that format is like, to really get that foundation laid for how we then interact with that and use Jinja to work with that. So within JSON, we've got this file structure that has arrays or lists, it has objects, and it has key value pairs. So as we can see on this slide here, we've got the overall box, which is vehicles. So this is an array or a list. Within that array, we have objects. And so each of those objects is a separate vehicle. So and within pipelines and JSON standard, generally, there is the arrays are zero-based or zero index-based, essentially meaning that, hey, what we have right here is we've got 3 different vehicles in this array. And we don't count those starting at 1, though. We count them starting at 0. So 0 is the first place, 1 is the second place, 2 is the third place. A little bit confusing. I can totally understand that, relate to that. Again, that's where a little bit of this more complex or advanced programming knowledge kind of comes into play. But so now that we've got these 3 different vehicles in this array, and within each of these vehicles, we have a key value pair. So looking at vehicle 0, that first object in the array, we've got a Ford Mustang that's 2021, and the color is green. So the key in this case is make, while the value is Ford. Going down the line, the next key is model, with the value being Mustang. And so one way to kind of think about this is in terms of Quickbase. Vehicles would be a table. Each of those vehicles within that table or within that array is a record. And then within that record, we've got a set of fields and then values for those fields. So in this case, we've got the vehicles table. We've got 4 fields within that vehicles table: make, model, year, and color. And then we've got 3 records within that vehicles table. So vehicle 0, vehicle 1, vehicle 2, Ford Mustang, Dodge Viper, and Corvette. everybody tracking so everybody tracking so far? If you have any questions, throw them in the QA, and we will try and get to those as we go. So now that we've got kind of a general overview of how the data is structured, theoretically, now we're going to get into, okay, what does that actually look like in the JSON file format? So here's an example of, on the left-hand side of a JSON file format of exactly what we just saw. The vehicles array with 3 different objects, each of those objects being a different car with details about them. Then over here on the right-hand side, we see a Jinja expression, and we see little a in there between the curly braces. So in this example, we're going to say that this data structure we see on the left is returned in step A of a pipeline. So in order to get at the data within this this JSON format, we need to call out A for step A .json. So .json gets us into that JSON object. From there, we would add .vehicles. So .vehicles then gets us into that vehicles key value pair. And now I just said it's a key value pair because vehicles is a key and the value is an array. So we're stepping into this vehicles array to get at all of the data or all of the objects within that array. Now let's say I want to take a look specifically at the first object or the first car within that array. In order to do that, I would go ahead and put this 0 within the brackets. So that then steps me into, again, 0 index-based programming. So I'm stepping into this first object within the array. In this case, the Ford Mustang. And now I want to take it one step further, and I want to get at the make of that. So then I would add .make. So this string here, a.json.vehicles, square brackets with the 0, .make would return the value Ford in this case. Everybody tracking so far? Do we have any questions that we need to hit at this point?
Ryan, it's Bree. We do have a question from John. He's asking if you are going to cover creating advanced query in pipeline.
So we are not using the webhooks channel in this session. We will cover some concepts that could be used within a webhooks request or pipeline. So
no, it was more around a query itself.
Okay.
Rather than a webhook.
Okay, gotcha. So like doing the advanced query with the native Quickbase query formula language. We will not be touching on that in this session.
All right, thank you. That's all we got for now.
Thank you, Bree. Okay, so now that we've kind of covered navigating the JSON object, let's hit on some of this Jinja syntax. So there's 3 main things that we can do within Jinja. We've got expressions, which are going to allow us to call variables, perform different calculations, operations, that type of thing. Then we've got, and that's going to be defined by these 2 curly braces at the front and at the end. So on the right-hand side there, we can see, hey, we're calling this variable a.name, and the second one, we're performing a few calculations and an operation of rounding that number. Below this, we then have statements. And statements are going to allow us to do a little more. So some statements are going to be like if else, set or for loops. And we are going to dive in a little deeper in those in a little bit. But statements can be very quickly identified by having a single curly brace with a % sign at both the opening and the closing ends of that statement. And then at the very bottom, we've got comments. And so we can throw in comments within our Jinja syntax to, comment what we're doing, make note, make it easier for you as you go back in the future to see, okay, what did I actually do? Or if maybe you're handing it off to somebody else. Comments is something that I am terrible at. I need to get much better at because I constantly have times where I'll go in to do something or change something, a couple weeks, a couple months down the road. I'm like, what is this doing? Why did I do it this way? Well, if I'd put some comments there, it'd be a little easier to pick that back up. But anyways, comments are going to be identified within Jinja as a open curly bracket with a pound sign at both the closing and the opening ends. And so we can see that as an example on the bottom right side. Excellent. So now we are actually going to jump into a demo. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And all of you can go ahead and open up the demo app. Real quick, on the homepage of the demo app, there's a little bit of some resources, links to different resources. So this Test Jinja, super helpful tester online to just play with different Jinja expressions and statements, that type of thing. And then a few other help documents, as well as JSON formatter. Comes in super handy if you're ever trying to create a JSON format object and you're having issues, it's not parsing properly, can definitely help. And then there's just a little bit of documentation on here. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the census data table. And so you may be wondering, well, why are we doing anything with census data? Well, honestly, it is a free API by the US government that is open and accessible to everybody. So why not take advantage of it? It makes for a great example and use case to demo here today. So I've got this table open, and I'm also going to go ahead and open pipelines as well. So open up pipelines. If you haven't tried it yet, check out the new style. As we saw in the keynote this morning, the new style is super helpful, and I really appreciate it. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a new pipeline. And again, if anybody has any comments, feel free to throw them in the Q&A, and we will try to get to those. So creating a pipeline, I'm going to name this, get census data. Description, it's good to throw a description, so I'm just going to throw in something very not helpful. And then tags, hey, this is for an Empower session. Again, just kind of showcasing some of the capabilities with the new pipelines dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and create this pipeline. And what we're going to do here, first things first, open up the Quickbase channel, open up the records section, and I'm going to do on new event. And so as we do this, I've already got the account set up with the user token. So if you haven't done that already, you're going to have to connect. But once we get that connected, we're going to select the census data table. That's the table we want to go ahead and start with. Fields for subsequent steps. This one, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to select the address. Actually, I don't care about the address. I'm going to select the benchmark description, the GeoID, and the US Census Data API. Trigger on any field. No, I don't want to trigger on any field. I want to trigger on two fields, the address and the trigger pipeline. So basically just getting some of the basic setup here so that we can get into actually playing with the JSON. Trigger on any field, that should be no. I want to do this on add record and on modify record. Excellent. I'm not going to add anything else in there, so we're good to go on that front. Then for step B, I'm going to open up the webhooks channel and the requests section. And I'm going to pull over this make request action. So this is going to be step B within this pipeline. And I'm going to scroll all the way down until I see this URL, this method, and this content type. Within the center panel over here, step A returns this value, US Census Data API. I'm going to pull this over into the URL because this is actually a formula field within the table that's actually formulating and creating the API call for us. So just nice and easy with that formula field, drop it in there. The method is going to be get. I want the content type to be application JSON. Excellent. Everybody tracking so far? And then what I want to do is close step B. I'm going to jump back into the Quickbase channel and pull over an update record step. And this is going to point to step A as the record. I'm going to add a couple of fields, just benchmark description and GeoID. And what I'm going to do, before I do anything else with step C, I'm going to turn, oh, you know what? I knew I was doing this out of order. I'm going to delete step C. I just want steps A and B for now. I'm going to turn this on. And I'm going to jump back into the census data table. And I'm going to click this trigger pipeline button. And of course, that user token is not accurate. So what I'm going to do, because I clearly did not test that out yet, is I'm going to jump back into the census data. I'm going to show a field, show that trigger pipeline, why is that not showing up there? And okay, so I'm just going to add a field after this one. My apologies, I should have double checked this beforehand, which clearly I did not. Okay, so within the one record in the census data table, I'm going to go ahead and check this trigger pipeline. I could also change the address, but I'm prepared for the address. I know this address has values that we're looking for, which is why I chose it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, which will then trigger the pipeline. And so we see.
Hey, Ryan,
we've got.
Oops, sorry.
Oh,
I was just going to say while we're waiting for that, Laura thought that you were going to have a Quickbase turtle shell, so I think she's disappointed that you are not wearing a turtle shell.
Bummer. You know what? I thought about it, but it was going to be too complex to try and get it up.
And then one other question from Carlos was, can Jinja be applied within code pages? I'm going to assume, Carlos, that you're asking if it can be used the same way it's used in pipelines. And Ryan, unless I'm wrong, that's a no, unless you actually have Python code page That would be the only way you could use Jinja. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Absolutely correct. Thank you, Bree.
That's all for now.
Okay. So now that we ran this pipeline one time, I'm going to go ahead and open up this activity. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull this out into a separate window over here. That way I can kind of look at some of this stuff side by side. So I'm going to open up the input output. I'm going to scroll down until I see this JSON. So at the very bottom of step B, once you've opened that input output, we should see this JSON object with some of these continuing to open below. So let me pull this back over here, and that is what I want. I'm now going to add step C, which is update a record. Now that I'm prepared for it, I'm going to go ahead and select record from step A. And again, I'm going to select the benchmark description and the GeoID. So at this point, what I've got is over here on the right-hand side is the output from the activity log. And I'm looking for the term benchmark description. So I'm looking for that key benchmark description within this JSON object. And so I could open up all these and I see here we've got benchmark description within this benchmark object, which is within this input object, which is within this result object, and they're lastly within that JSON object. So what I want to do is I want to write an expression, a Jinja expression, that will kind of follow that trail and take me all the way down to benchmark description, grabbing that value there. And so first things first, I can pull over any one of these. As you see in the center panel here, they all have two curly braces at both the beginning and the end, meaning, hey, each of these are actually Jinja expressions. So if I wanted to kind of get that starter, I could just drag that over and clear everything out of there. Or I could just say, you know what, I know that I'm writing a Jinja expression, I'm going to do two curly braces. So this is step B, so I'm going to hit b.json. Again, looking over here at the activity log, we see that we've got JSON as the object. So at this point, I've got b.json, which is referring to, hey, it's looking at everything within here. But I want to narrow that down just to that benchmark description. So again, following that path, it's going to be json.result. Because we've got result over here, and we need to drop down to input, so .input. And then we need to jump into the benchmark object as well. So it's going to be .benchmark. And then lastly, within the benchmark object, we have benchmark description. So I can go ahead and finally do .benchmark description. Okay. This expression here, b.json.result.input.benchmark description. This is, again, following this line here. So step b.json.result.input.benchmark description. And it will return this value here. Public address ranges, census, 2020 benchmark. Awesome. So now we've got that one down. But now we want to look for GeoID. And because I've looked at and done so much with this census data API, I know that the GeoID is actually within this geographies, census blocks, object 0, and it is all the way down here. again, I chose the census data as a great example because we get to work through all of these different iterations, trying to get down to that final object that we're looking for. So a lot of good practice here. So for the GeoID, we're going to start very similarly. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this b.json.result, because if we close the result object, we see we lose everything below. So we know it's within the result object. And then we want to jump into address matches. So we're going to go ahead and paste that and do dot address matches. That takes us into the address matches, which is an array with an object of 0. It's only has one object there, and the index is 0. So going back to the example before, we're going to do a square bracket with a 0 in there, basically stepping into that very first object within the array. Now within this object, I know that I want to come all the way down to geographies. So I'm going to do dot geographies. I'm going to open that up. We see, okay, now there's another, there's census blocks. So I will go ahead and do, if I do dot census blocks. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and you may have noticed, is I've been matching the capitalization exactly. That is key. If you do not match capitalization from the JSON object to your Jinja expression, it will not function the way you expect. So just make sure you always keep that capitalization consistent. So right now, I'm actually going to go ahead and close this expression and click out of here. And we see, hey, this is showing red. So there is an error here. And the reason for that is because we have this space. You cannot have a space within this Jinja expression the way we have it here. So in this case, there is a space here within the JSON object, so we need to account for it. And the way that we can do so is actually, instead of using the dot method for navigating through that, we can actually use a square bracket with a quote. We're going to wrap that in quotes with the square bracket. And when I click out of there now, we see that the red error goes away. So because there is a space within this census blocks, we needed to account for that with a square bracket and a quote. And it can be, I believe, either a single quote or a double quote. Either one will work. So now we've stepped into the census blocks. Okay, great. This is an array again. A single object array. What we're going to do, again, what we did with address matches above, I'm just going to go ahead and copy that 0 within the square brackets, drop it down there. So finally, we're in this object where the GeoID exists. So last thing to do here is dot GeoID. Excellent. We see there's no errors. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. Jumping back into the census data record, I'm going to edit it. I'm going to check or uncheck this trigger pipeline. I'm going to save and close. Jumping back over to the pipeline side, we see that the pipeline started. And in step C, we see that we've got the benchmark description with that value as well as the GeoID. Again, we can go back to Quickbase record, refresh it, and we see those values there. So there you have it. If you've been following along, you just successfully navigated a JSON, a fairly complex, might I add, JSON response to extract data from that. Any questions on that so far?
So we did have a couple questions, Ryan. There were two questions actually that I just wanted to touch on quickly because they were asking how you can parse through an XML response because the older API does give you an XML payload. On those, so kind of the options are to write a regex and use the text included channel and pipelines. I've also seen clients dump the entire payload into a field and use a formula kind of to parse out the values that they wanted. So that answers those. I don't know if you had anything to add on that. And then we had a couple other questions. There's lots coming in.
Yep.
Okay, there were a couple questions about looping. I don't know if you're going to get into that later.
Awesome. Yes. So right after this, we are going to jump into statements, which we'll get to looping, and then we also have some demos for that as well.
Okay, perfect. So a couple more. Vladimir asked when the activate pipeline field is going to be available. I'm not really sure I follow that question, unless you're talking about the trigger pipeline checkbox maybe.
Yeah, so this is a whoopsie on my side. This actually, an easy way to do it is within the settings. If you go to the app settings into the app properties, basically the reason that button didn't work the way that I expected it to is because of application tokens. So if you uncheck that require applications tokens, hit save, then that button on the census data record should work for trigger pipeline. And
awesome,
there we go.
Awesome.
And we see that it's running now again.
So Janelle had a question, when do we need to worry about casting types? Like if we are going to insert into a number field, will we need to cast it as an integer?
So within pipelines, if you're using a native channel, correct me if I'm wrong, Bree, but unless you need to transform that data somehow, you don't need to worry about casting the correct type. Now, and one of the things we'll get into is like transforming a float number with decimal places to an integer, where you don't want to have any decimal places. You will need to use that using a filter. Again, we will get to that here shortly.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the only thing I would really add to that is you just need to make sure that the data that's coming in will go into the field type you have. So for instance, if you have a date time field and you try to shove text into it using this, it's not going to work. Quickbase is not going to accept that.
Yep.
And
exactly.
then one last one from Thomas. Can we see the API formula field?
So if you have downloaded this application, you can jump into the field settings for that and take a look.
All right, great.
Awesome. So let's jump back to the deck and get into statements. Okay, so as I mentioned before, statements allow us to do various things. First things being, hey, we can set a variable. So if you are going to be utilizing something repetitively, a great way to do that is with a variable. Instead of having to rewrite, in this case, a.make with a space plus a.model, instead of having to do that 4 different times, if that was indeed the use case, you could just set that variable and then just use, in this case, car to call that variable. Down below, again, we see, hey, I want to get this total. I'm going to use it for the total and the average. Again, kind of streamlining the number of characters and the work that is being done. Do it once and then just call that. And so now we get to kind of compare Jinja versus formulas. And so everybody here is familiar with formulas, I would assume, being a Quickbase builder. And so formulas are super powerful. They are able to do a lot of things. And same with Jinja. Jinja, again, very similar to formulas, but within pipelines. So Quickbase formula language is usable within formulas and throughout the platform. And then essentially the formula equivalent within pipelines would be Jinja. Now, as we walk through this, we will see that, hey, there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some differences, not just in the syntax itself, but also in the capabilities. And kind of where Jinja starts to shine is when we get to like the for loop, for example, which we're going to hit on next. So in this case, what we've got here is, again, the Jinja statement here, set car, a.make, add a space, a.model, and then we call car. Right below that, we see the Quickbase formula equivalent. Very similar, doing the exact same thing. Next, we can do if else. So, if we want to add some conditional logic, we can certainly do that by adding this if statement, building out our logical expression. In this case, a.year is greater than b.year, then we want to do this. Otherwise, if a.year is equal to b.year, then we want to do this. If neither of those are true, then we want to go ahead and do this last final piece. And then we're going to end it. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind is within Jinja statements, we always, or specifically with the end, or the if else and the for loop, we need to have that end if that we see here at the bottom. So again, jumping into kind of showing the difference between, hey, Jinja statement versus a Quickbase formula. They're producing the exact same results, just with a slightly different syntax. And now where Jinja really starts to shine, again, is going to be with that for each, or that for loop. And what that does is it allows us to iterate over an array of items. And so in this case, going back to the example we saw at the beginning with the vehicles, the 3 cars, within here, we are doing a for loop. We're saying for each car that's within the array of a.json.vehicles, then I want to do this, do whatever it is. In this case, we're going to throw the year and then the make and the model. And then we're going to end that for loop. And at the bottom, we see what the output is. So again, using that example, we got the Ford Mustang, the Dodge Viper, and that Corvette. Now to take it a step further, within a for loop, we can actually tag in an if statement. So exact same expression, just at the beginning, within that first line, we've added if car.year is greater than or equal to 2020. So we're going to loop through all of those vehicles that are in the array, but we're only going to do something if the car year is greater than 2020. And we can see at the bottom, the output no longer has the 2017 Dodge Viper because it didn't meet, it didn't pass that logical condition. And then filters. So filters are, you can think of them kind of in terms of being in line with Quickbase functions. They allow us to do different transformations of the data itself. So here's a few examples. So in this case, at the top, we've got an array of a.year a.make, a.model, and we're going to join those with the space. And we see that that prints out a string of those three values with spaces in between them. The second one down, we're taking a value that is a float, so it's got decimal places. We're saying, you know what, we want this to be returned as an integer, so just a whole number. And we've got that. And then down below, we've got, hey, I want to sort this array of data in a specific, or I want to sort this in alphanumeric order. And so we've got that. Then here's a few examples of the Jinja expression with that filter versus the equivalent Quickbase formula. So we can see there's various different ways to accomplish some of these different things. And now let's go ahead and we're going to jump back into the application. At this point, we're going to take a look at the vehicles table. So within the vehicles table, we've got a list of 30 different vehicles. And what we want to do is we want to jump into pipelines, and we're going to try something new here. So I'm going to go back out to my pipelines. I'm going to create a new pipeline. I'm going to call this vehicle search. And I'm going to give a description. We're going to aggregate. I don't know how to spell aggregate apparently, but we're going to aggregate the vehicle data into a single search record. I'm going to tag this with Empower, and I'm going to go ahead and create it. So in this case, I want to open up the records section of the Quickbase channel, and I'm going to do a search records. And I want to search the table vehicles, and I want to pull in all of the fields within that table, so all 5 of them. And I'm not going to add anything else, no conditions, no limits. And I need to extend that a little bit. I'm going to collapse step A, and by default, it creates this for each loop within pipelines. I'm going to actually go ahead and trash that. So in this case, because I want to create an aggregate of all of the records that are found, I don't want to operate on each record individually like it would do within that for each loop within the native pipelines. So I've got step A, search records. Then I'm going to pull over a create record for step B. The table that we're going to be touching at this point is going to be the vehicle search. So I want to create a record within this vehicle search table, and fields to specify values. I'm going to go ahead and just select all 5 of them. And they're not going to show up in the order that we're actually going to use them, but that's okay. So looking at step A, we see these little 3 lines over here in the center panel. So this is indicating that this is, in fact, an array. An array is being returned from step A. Now, what do we learn about arrays? We can iterate through those arrays within Jinja using a for loop. But before we even do that, I just want to get the number of records that's being returned within that native search query in pipelines. So I'm going to go ahead and add in an expression for number of records. It's going to be A. And I'm going to throw a filter in there to get the length. So A again, is an array, and I want to receive the length of that array. So if I run this, it's going to do that query, and it's going to then create a record with number of records is 30, which we can verify in step A, 30 records were returned. So there we go. We've captured the number of records very quickly and easily from the search step. So I'm going to close that. Awesome. That's great. What if I want to just return all of those values in a single field? Well, within this records field, you could just say, you know what? I'm just going to drop A in there. And it will, if I run it, it will go ahead and show me all of the details from all of those 30 different records in a single field. So as this runs, we're coming down here, and once this shows up, we will see in the records, hey, look, we've got color, khaki, and it pulls in all of these extra details as far as, okay, some of the other details about the record ID, created by, last modified by, all of that. And we can actually jump back into this vehicle search table and see what that looks like. So here we go. We've got record. That's one record. That's a lot of details. I don't really want all those details in there. I don't necessarily need every single piece of information from that record within here. Maybe I just want to have returned the like the year, the make, and the model. So instead of just using A, I'm going to go ahead and change this to an expression, or I'm sorry, a statement. I'm going to do a for loop. So for each car in A. Okay, so we're saying for each record that's returned in step A, what do I want to do? Well, I want to display the year. So in this case, it's going to be car. Actually, let me take a step back. Over here in the center panel, we've got all of the values that are being returned within each of those records. So I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to pull over the year. So just to keep it clean, I'm going to put that on a second line, and I'm actually going to close this out to get rid of that error. So I'm going to do end for no spaces, and opening and closing that with the curly brace and %sign. So what we see here, though, is a.year isn't going to give us what we want because there's multiple records within that array of A. So I actually want to do car.year, referencing, hey, as we go through this loop and iterate on it, a car is referring to a single object within that array. So car.year. And because I know it's by default going to try and return that as a float with a 0.0, I'm just going to, right off the bat, go ahead and throw that int in there, that int filter. So I'm going to convert it into an integer. So a whole number, no decimals, no nothing. And you know what? I'm going to wrap this within a parentheses. And I'm going to put this, you know what? We'll leave it like this for now. Keep it simple. So I've got first expression there. So I'm returning the car.year as an integer. Next, I want to do car.make. Then I'm going to add space outside of that expression, and I'm going to do car.model. So this here is actually the same as if I were to do a join of an array. So you don't need to do this, but I just want to show it to you for example's sake. So I've created an array. I've passed in car.year as an integer as a value within that array. I'm going to pass in car.make, the value within that array, and car.model as a value within that array. So we've got 3 values in that array, and I want to do this filter, the join filter, passing in a space in between them. And I've got a few extra characters there. So both this line and this line will return me the exact same thing. We just see that the top one has less filters, a little less complexity. We just have a few more expressions with spaces in between them, whereas we're just accounting for that altogether within the second one. So I'm going to go ahead and activate that quick. Or better yet, I could have commented it out, but I wasn't thinking quick enough to do that. So as this runs, we should see that within the records, it's going to return a list of just those, the year, the make, and the model, instead of all those extra details that we saw the last time. So we see, okay, great, we've got all of these with the values we expect. On this side, I can refresh the page, and there we see 2011 and all the way down. So there we've transformed the data as we iterated over each and every record. Awesome. Now what if I want to do that same thing, but in this field, vehicles newer than 2020, I want to do it with an if statement. I only want to return those values if the car is greater than or equal to 2020, or the vehicle year. So I'm going to throw an if, and this is exactly what we saw within that slide a little bit ago. So for each car in array A, I want to say if the car.year is greater than or equal to 2020. I've got the iterator, I've got the if statement, the logical expression, and then the actual values that we're going to output there. So if I run this again, we still see 30 records, all that stuff is returned. And if we jump back into here, going to refresh the page, we'll have a new record. This one has those 2 vehicles that are newer than 2020. Any questions on that so far? Everybody kind of understand the concept and what we're doing with these for loops and how we are iterating over each of those arrays or each of those objects within an array. Additionally, like right now within the pipeline, we're doing this solely based on the step A, which is search records. But this exact same concept and construct within Jinja is applicable across the board. So whether you're using a webhook channel to return data like we did within the census data, if there were any long arrays that had multiple values, we could do the exact same thing and say, hey, for each of these, I want to do something. Another great example of it would be within the Outlook channel. If you are piping in emails into pipelines, so when you get a new email and maybe you want to iterate over everybody that's within the CC list or the to list, well, we could use a Jinja for loop to extract all of those email addresses and throw it all into a single field within Quickbase. So scrolling back down within step B, we've seen how we can iterate over those. Awesome. We've seen how we can even throw in an if statement as we iterate. Great. Now, what if I want to get a list of just the unique makes within those records? So just those unique manufacturers. So for starters, I'm going to want to, again, do a for loop for each car in A. I'm going to go ahead and close this out with an end for before I forget. So we've got a loop. Awesome. But now I want to not only print out all of the makes, I want to, within that loop, I want to create a list of all of the makes. And then once we have that list or that array, then I want to say, you know what? I want to parse that down to be only unique values within that array. So in order to do that, we actually need to take advantage of a variable that is outside of the for loop. And so what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and create a variable. So we're going to open that up with open curly brace, %sign. We're going to say set, again, because set is what allows us to set those variables. So we're going to say set this list, it's going to be, we're going to title it makes. Okay. Then we need to create this makes with an array that we can push values into. In order to do that, we actually need to do something like this with namespace. And this gets a little more complex as to like why we need to use this namespace, and then value equals open square bracket, close square bracket. And really what that comes down to is scoping. Scoping of the variable to ensure that, hey, we can push values into this while we're within a smaller scope and still take advantage of it. And so it may not make 100% sense, but I promise you this is the way that we can actually accomplish what we're looking for here. So we've got this expression or this statement. So set makes, again, we're looking at the vehicle makes, equals namespace. Within parentheses, we've then got value equals open and close square brackets, indicating that, hey, that value is an array. So once we've got that set, we can now push values into that. And within the loop, we do that by very similar fashion. We're going to essentially create a variable. We're going to say set. This is going to be makes.value. And I'm getting that from, hey, makes is the variable name, and it has a value attribute. So we've got set makes.value equal to makes.value, because we want to maintain the same values that have already been added. And then we just want to append an additional value for this particular vehicle. We've got append car.make. And then I need to close out that statement. So within the for loop, so before the for loop, we're setting this variable as makes with an attribute of value, which is an array. Then we jump into the for loop where we're looping over each individual record that is returned within that array in step A. And within there, we're saying, hey, we're going to set a variable, which is makes.value, which already exists with a globally scoped variable. Again, a lot of this just comes from scoping, which is going to be slightly more complex programming concept. But I guess one way to think about it is within Quickbase, if you create a formula within one table, you can't then reference that same formula in another table without some sort of connection between there, right? Well, let me take that back. As of right now, all we've ever known, because we've got formula queries coming, which is super exciting. Let's not think about that in terms of that right now. But as right now, within Quickbase, if you create a formula within one table, you can't reference that formula in another table without some sort of relationship that expands the scope, I guess you could say. And so similar concept here, where we need to do that within this Jinja expression. So with that, we're then setting makes.value equals makes.value, again, taking that existing value from that array, and then we're appending the car.make for the car that we are currently iterating on. Everybody tracking so far? I hope so. But I know, again, like I said at the beginning, this is a more advanced topic for reasons specifically like this. So now we've got an array. Well, once we step out of that for loop, we've got an array of values. And if we just left it as makes.value, we could print this value. And you know what? We're going to do just that. I'm going to go ahead and run this just so we can see what this looks like. Great. We've got that record created. When I refresh this page, so we see this long, ugly list of values within the makes field. We see that it is wrapped in brackets, square brackets, beginning to end, because it is an array. And we see a lot of duplicates in here. We got Toyota, Chevrolet, GMC. They're all repeating themselves. And that's because we didn't transform that array within the pipeline to make it, user friendly. So what we want to do is we could say at the end of this, I'm going to join all of these values. I want to join them with a semicolon and a space. So we're transforming what is an array into a text string separated by semicolons. And if I run that, that will go ahead and run, and we will see exactly that. It's going to return as, instead of this ugly looking pattern, it's going to be nice and pretty. But we're still going to have duplicates. Okay, so now if we refresh this, there we go. So again, looks much prettier, but we still have duplicates. So what we want to do now is we actually want to use a filter to slim that down just to be the unique values. So right at the beginning, before makes.value, I'm going to throw a parenthesis in there. And we're going to say, I want to pass in the unique filter. And then I also want to sort that. So I want to make sure that that is sorted alphabetically. And then right after that sort filter, throwing in that closing parenthesis, and then we're still going to leave the join. So at this point, what I would expect to happen is we'll see it in that nice, pretty format, but it's going to be sorted alphabetically, and we won't see any duplicates. So I think there should be, maybe 5 to 10 different values appear there then, once it's unique. So as this is running, any questions so far? I know some of this can be a bit high level, but hoping to make it a little more user-friendly and easier to pick up on.
Hey, Ryan, we do have some questions. We had a couple about summing values from, multiple records. And then also there were a couple questions about how would we, if you wanted to move these records, how would you insert them one by one? So maybe kind of go back to where you had deleted that for loop before so that they could do all of those. And Alan is asking why car? Could it be another word? So maybe explain the variable name.
Yep, totally. So to hit that first question, if we wanted to operate on each of those vehicles or those cars individually, if you recall, I had this for each here, and I hit the trash can on it because I didn't want to use it. So if I wanted to operate on each and every one of those individually, then I would do that within the for each loop. And so at that point, I could say, hey, I want to create a record, and it's going to create the record for every single record that I find. In this case, I wanted to create an aggregation record where I'm just pulling in all of the data from all of the records. And I wanted to say, hey, I want to operate on all 30 records at one time in a single record versus creating them all individually. And then to that second question, in here we've got car. This could literally be anything. There's no requirements. I mean, as long as it, it's a string of some sort. So it doesn't make, this means nothing to me other than the fact that, hey, it's a variable, ASDE. So over here, instead of using car, I would just use ASDE. And what that ASDE is referencing in this case is just, hey, this is a single object that is being returned from that array. So that array of A up here has objects within it. And I'm giving those objects a name of ASDE or car or vehicle. So it really doesn't matter how it's named, just try and keep it consistent with what you're actually operating on to make it easier to pick up on and understand what's going on. Because I can promise you, if you've got a field or a webhook request, for example, that has 50 to 100 lines of Jinja, it's going to make it a whole lot easier if you name it something consistent with what it actually is. So we've got vehicle in a, then down here, vehicle.make. And then going back to summing, we can absolutely sum. And I should have had an example of that. I don't have an example of that ready, but you can certainly hit up the pipelines Jinja documentation, which there is a link to on the dashboard of this page or of this application. So if we open up the dashboard, we've got about Jinja pipelines documentation. There is a lot of good stuff here. And one other thing that I don't think I mentioned earlier that I'll touch on quick is pipeline or Jinja exists outside of pipelines and outside of Quickbase, as I mentioned at the beginning. What I didn't mention is that Jinja within pipelines is a slightly different variation of other Jinja instances that exist. So a lot of people use Jinja for a lot of different things. And so can be minute differences between different installations of Jinja. So like, for example, I have a link here to Jinja templates, super helpful resource, but everything in here may not be applicable to pipelines instance within Jinja. I mean, I totally got that backwards. Everything that we find in here may not be one-for-one to the Jinja that is installed within pipelines, if that makes sense. I hope it does. So there, like I said, there's certainly a lot of good resources out there online. Just you will want to test within pipelines because not everything that you find will work within the pipelines instance of Jinja. And that's where, you know, the about Jinja, the actual pipelines documentation, it comes in super handy because everything that you find there will actually work within pipelines. Awesome. So now let's lastly do this owner list. So kind of what I mentioned before in terms of being able to pull like the list of recipients from an Outlook email. We're going to do something similar here with the owner list. So I want to say for each owner, for each, in this case, yeah, I'll call it owner because that's what we're looking at. So for each owner in A, I want to first close this out with the end for at the end. I want to grab you know what, before I type anything here, I want to show you that we can still take advantage of the center panel here. So if we scroll down, we've got owner, and we see that this is an object. If we hover over it, specify either user ID or user email, and we see that that says it is an object. So I know that that object has attributes, as we can see here, first name, last name, all the way down. So I want to pull in the first name, let's say. Now, one of the things you may notice is when I pull this over, it's still referencing step A. But because within the for loop, I'm already referencing step A, I don't need to reference it. I mean, not even I don't need to, but I don't want to reference it within that for loop. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that A period. We're going to leave it as owner, which is consistent with what I've named those objects that we're iterating over there. So owner dot first name. Awesome. I'm going to throw a space in there. And I'm going to do the exact same thing, pull over the last name. Once again, removing that A dot. So now this is going to return me a list of all of the owners of the vehicles with their first and their last name. And I could pull in email, I could pull in any of these different attributes the same way. When I go ahead and run that, we'll see that that runs. We'll give it a second. And over here, this owner list field is actually a user list field. And so within here, actually, you know what? I didn't even think about that. I did not want to pull in first name, last name. I wanted the email because that is in fact a user list field. So if I refresh this page now, we're going to see, yeah, it didn't add in because I didn't provide the correct type of input. So I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to pull over the email instead. So we once again get rid of that A dot. So for each owner in the array of A, I want to pull in owner email. And because it's a user list field, I'm going to go ahead and throw in that semicolon just to make sure that when it pushes into the field, it actually, the field itself identifies and recognizes that, hey, these are all individual users that we need to kind of correlate to. And same concept if you were to do that recipients with an Outlook or really any of the other channels if we wanted to work with the user fields. And so, did that not quite finish? Or I missed something. You know what? There we go. So what we missed here is I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I was mistaken. We don't want that to be owner because that's really not what we are going through. We're going through vehicles. And this is exactly what comes back to, hey, name it something that actually makes sense. Otherwise, you're going to confuse yourself, just like I did. And because we actually want to reference the vehicle, which the vehicle has an owner, which has an email. So this is actually the string that I want to be able to pull in those emails. And as you may have seen, with that, there were when that activity showed up, there was just a long string of semicolons, and that's because within this for loop, we're looping through every single vehicle, so 30 vehicles, and if there isn't an owner, it's still going to show this semicolon. So I'm actually going to add in logical expression here. So or logical statement, I should say, if owner, if vehicle dot owner. I'm going to leave it just like that. So essentially what this is saying is, hey, if vehicle.owner exists, if it is defined, if it has a value, then I want to operate on that. And so at that point, we'll do vehicle.owner.email. And this should give us what we're looking for, unlike the last time. And so as this runs, do we have any questions about what we've covered, what's still running here? We'll try and hit all of those questions. And there we go. So now we see this owner list has a list of the actual users that are owners of those vehicles. So once again, it is very important to make sure that you name this something that makes sense, and then you follow that same pattern as far as navigating through that JSON, or essentially navigating through all of the values. And as we see, going back to the beginning, an owner is an object. Up here, step A returns an array. Within these arrays and these objects, there are values that are identified as expressions within there. So really just goes back to the foundational concepts and kind of where that stuff comes into play and how to take advantage of that. Okay, so let's close that. So that's pretty much going to wrap it up. Hopefully at this point, you understand what Jinja is and how Jinja differs from standard Quickbase formulas and kind of some of the benefits that we can have within Jinja that we can't have within formulas. And sometimes it may make sense to create a pipeline to handle some processes that can't be done within a formula. And also just overall understanding what is possible within Jinja. And any questions? So I'm just going to run through some of these questions here, see if we can knock them out. I was using a search step and ran into a problem with my Jinja expression when the search step returned over 100 records. The object was no longer available. Walker, that is 100% accurate and totally slipped my mind. I should have mentioned that sooner. With the setup that I had there, where we are doing a search records as step A, skipping over that for each that native for each and going straight to step B, where we're creating the records and operating on the records returned within that search step, there is a limit to 100 records. So if you get over 100 records in that search step, your Jinja expressions that are trying to operate on that will not succeed. But that is only in regards to the native search functionality, the search steps. And so, again, all of the concepts that we discussed here today and walked through are applicable across any channel, whether it's the webhooks channel or the Quickbase channel or any of the other channels that are available. So you can kind of mix and match, see what works best for your specific use case. If you're going to be using over 100 records, maybe can you split it up? Can you break it down into possibly a callable pipeline that is recursive, that calls itself and keeps the limit to 100? Or maybe you just go straight to using the webhooks channel if you're adept at doing that from scratch. So there's totally different ways to accomplish the same task. It just matters of how complex you want to get or how simple you want it to be. Can we pull attachment files and rich text from the body of emails using the Outlook channel yet? I do not know. That would be a great question for the pipelines team. When I receive in Jinja the records from a previous search, okay, yep, we just touched on that. That is a limitation of the first 100 records when we're using that native search step. If we have an int or integer variable, how can we change the value of this int variable inside a for loop? So like you've set a variable outside of the for loop and then you want to change that within. So within, let me go ahead and share that screen again. Within a for loop, we can do any sort of filters or anything that are necessary. So yeah, this is a perfect example here. So like in this case, we're within a for loop and we're saying, hey, for each of the cars that are returned here, I want to take the car that year and return that as an int, and then do a few other things. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. Is there any way with Jinja or pipelines to call a code page? So John, unfortunately, there is not. And really that comes down to how code pages are constructed. Code pages are by nature going to be a client side process, which means it actually has to be open in the browser for it to actually do something. And that really comes down to client side versus server side. And pipelines and automations and all those things are going to be server side, where it's actually running independently on a server, exclusive, like independent of any human interaction with it. Whereas code pages, being in JavaScript and HTML, all that, it requires some sort of actual calling of that page manually. So unfortunately, there is not a way to do that from pipelines. Let's see, anything else? I know this was a pretty lengthy session. Hopefully you guys found it valuable, maybe picked up a few new tips and tricks as far as working with pipelines and Jinja. And I really do hope that you guys are able to take some of this away and start implementing it within your own pipelines to start to streamline some of your processes that may have been previously a little more complex, having to do stuff in formulas, all that. But now you may be able to just push that into pipelines and get that streamlined. And with that, thank you all. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week at Empower.